Woman opens up about dating her biological father after 12 years of estrangement. A woman has opened up about being in a relationship with her biological father after the pair were separated for 12 years. During the late 1980s, the individual who established a support group aimed at helping adopted children reunite with their biological relatives introduced the term genetic sexual attraction, GSA, to characterize the profound romantic and sexual emotions that often emerged during these reunions. Experts suggest that these unconventional feelings arise in roughly half of the cases involving estranged relatives who reconnect as adults. It's noteworthy that the person who discovered GSA herself experienced attraction to the son she had adopted out after encountering him 26 years later. Keith Pullman, who runs a marriage equality blog, has revealed that consensual father and daughter relation research has been done into why reunions can bring sexual feelings. An 18-year-old woman from the Great Lakes spoke to The Cut about her consensual relationship with her father, who she was separated from for 12 years. The woman, whose name was removed to protect her identity, revealed how she last saw her father when she was 5 years old after her parents separated and couldn't agree on visitation arrangements. The woman was reunited with her dad when she was 17 years old after they had communicated online for a few days. The pair quickly realized that they had a lot in common and then decided to spend the week together. When talking about the first moment of seeing her father, the woman said, "It was so weird and confusing. I was seeing my dad for the first time in forever, but it was also like, he's so good looking. And then I was like, what the hell are you thinking? What is wrong with you? I saw him as my dad, but then also part of me was like, I'm meeting this guy who I have been talking to over the internet and really connecting with, and I find him attractive." Spoon for the first few nights, and the feelings were declared mutual after they began cuddling and play fighting. "We stopped and said that we didn't know what was going on but admitted that we had strong feelings for each other. We discussed whether it was wrong and then we kissed. And then we made out, and then we made love for the first time. That was when I lost my virginity," she said. The conversation then turned to how people in the family perceive their relationship. At the time of the interview, she revealed that she hadn't told her mother, but that she intended to do so when they moved to New Jersey, as adult incest isn't against the law there. "Everyone on my mom's side of the family sees us as father and daughter," she said. "Those who know that he's my dad and that we are engaged, include my father's parents. They can see we are happy together and they can't wait for us to have babies. They treat us just like any other couple. The couple intends to have children together but will refrain from telling their kids about the nature of their relationship so they don't have any troubles growing up. What it's like to date your dad." In the late 80s, the founder of a support group for adopted children who had recently reconnected with their biological relatives coined the term genetic sexual attraction, GSA, to describe the intense romantic and sexual feelings that she observed occurring in many of these reunions. Experts estimate that these taboo feelings occur in about 50% of cases where estranged relatives are reunited as adults. GSA's discoverer had herself become attracted to the son she'd adopted out when she met him 26 years later, but her feelings were not reciprocated. Though the research is scarce, those who have studied GSA offer a range of possible explanations for it, including a primordial feeling of always having belonged to the estranged relative, a sense of wanting to experience the bonding missed out on during childhood, or simply an overwhelming closeness based on similarities, like meeting a mate who was designed for you in a science lab. Perhaps GSA accounts for Kevin Gates's attraction to his first cousin. Consensual incest between fathers and their daughters remains the least reported and perhaps the most taboo GSA relationship. Keith Pullman, who runs a marriage equality blog, has personally talked to over 20 GSA couples and notes that he's only had a few father-daughter couples speak out, speculating that many of them fear that others will assume the daughter must have been abused in childhood. It should be said that when these unions lead to children, those children can face potentially serious difficulties as a result of the genetic implications of incest, even if some online communities downplay these risks. Here, an 18-year-old woman from the Great Lakes region describes her romantic relationship of almost 2 years with the biological father she met after 12 years of estrangement. "What was your family like when you were growing up?" "My parents had me when they were 18, they met in high school and I was conceived on prom night. They were serious for about 6 months, but broke up while my mom was still pregnant with me. My dad wasn't there when I was born. I think my mom's psychological problems meant the relationship never really worked out. She has bipolar disorder and some other mental health issues. They just weren't happy and didn't really keep in contact after I was born. She wanted to do it alone. When she's manic, it's hard to know what she's going to say. After I was born, she had a nervous breakdown and couldn't take care of me, so I lived with her grandparents until I was about 2. I think that's part of the reason we've never been close. We didn't bond when I was a baby. Did you have any contact with your father when you were a child? He briefly came back into my life when I was about 3 or 4, and I saw him on weekends until I was about 5. He lived about an hour away from us, and my parents constantly argued about visitation. He was always doing the drive to see me because my mom wasn't very fond of it. She wouldn't even meet him halfway. Can you remember much from your time with your dad when you were little? I have some memories. He spoiled me rotten. I had this giant storage tote of Barbie dolls, and I had my own Mary-Kate and Ashley bedroom. It was a little girl's dream. We'd sit in the yard blowing bubbles together, and he took me to the zoo where he bought me a stuffed animal that I kept until I was 16. I ended up washing it and stupidly put it in the dryer, which melted all its fur. I remember he gave me a miniature tea set. I still have it. So then there was zero contact or word from him. When I was about 15, he emailed my mom saying he'd like to see me. I vividly remember the moment she told me. I said I missed him and wouldn't mind seeing him. She asked me how I could miss someone I hadn't been with for such a long time. But what I missed was a fatherly figure. My mom's always picked the wrong guy out of the crowd, and she's had a couple of divorces. I'm still not really close with my current stepfather, even though they've been together for 10 years. For whatever reason, my father and I didn't end up meeting for 2 more years, so there was no contact for 12 years. We were reunited when I was 17. So what were your feelings toward him when you were growing up? Did you think about him much? I'd wonder where he was, what he was doing. Why haven't I seen him or heard from him? What did my mom do? What did he do? What did I do? My abandonment issues really hit me when I was a teenager. My mom and my stepfather took a break because they were fighting so much, and I cried the entire time he was gone. I missed him, which was weird because we didn't have much of a relationship. I asked myself, why am I crying over someone I'm not even close to? Do you think it triggered the abandonment you felt from your own dad? Yeah, I think I was subconsciously replaying what I'd been through. How many stepfathers have you had? Near the end of the time my parents had joint custody of me, I had a stepdad. He took good care of my mom, but she went through one of her stages again, so it ended. She had another husband who went crazy and tried to kill her. He was schizophrenic. Then she got with my brother's dad and they dated for a while, but when my brother was born the dad didn't want anything to do with him, so I helped my mom raise him. Once he was about 3, she got together with my current stepdad and had my baby sister. My brother and I are 9 years apart and my sister is 12 years younger than me. I think of them as my brother and sister, and I also think of them as my babies because I helped raise them. Why didn't your father try to get in touch with you? My mom said that he didn't want to have anything to do with me. But she was very controlling and kept me under Fort Knox-like conditions. She's had my Facebook password since I've had an account. One day, after I got my Facebook privileges back, he added me as a friend. At first, I figured it was my grandpa because they have very similar names. I thought, maybe grandpa got techie. Then I realized it was my dad. I was like, oh my god, where have you been? I don't know if I can get close to you. I told him I thought he was dead and asked why it took him so long to contact me. He said he'd been adding me on Facebook, but I'd always decline his requests. But that was my mom controlling my account. After we reunited, he showed me emails he'd sent trying to contact me. What happened next? We chit-chat online for a few days and found out we were similar. We shared the same favorite TV shows, The Simpsons and The Big Bang Theory, and we both loved to draw. He came to see me about a week later. You wouldn't have believed we hadn't been around each other for 12 years. The idea of us getting to know him seemed strange because we are so much alike. He came and hung out all day, and then I asked to come spend a week with him. He lived in a small town about 30 minutes away. I think my mom knew I was going to move out, and it really was getting to the point where I needed to escape. She was so controlling. Has she always been that way? Not when I was younger. She was going through a wild stage and she wanted to be more of a friend than a mother. She was still in her 20s and she worked at a bar. When I turned 13, she cracked down military style. I didn't have a voice and I had to do everything she asked, just to keep the peace. Did you date when you were a teenager? I didn't really have a social life. I stayed home a lot because my mom didn't trust me, and most of the kids my age were hooked on heroin, so it was hard to find friends. I lived in such a small town where there was nothing to do. In 5th grade, I dated a boy for 2 years. But one night he got drunk and had sex with a girl who ended up pregnant. It fucked everything up. I told him he had to go and be with this girl and take care of the kid. She ended up falling asleep with a cigarette in her mouth and their house burned down, so she left town with the kid and never came back. I supported him through that and we ended up half-assed dating. Then my mom found letters we had written to each other about making out. She said things were getting too serious and sexual, took me out of class and homeschooled me for a while. Did you have sex with that boyfriend? No. I had a girlfriend in middle school and that was the most major sexual experience I'd ever had. But she was very religious and every time we were intimate she would sob and read me verses out of the Bible. It made me feel like I'd hurt her. The second time we did it she cried and said we'd done something wrong and she was worried her grandmother would find out. I was done after that. No more crying and no more Bible transcripts. She had me in tears because I felt so guilty. How do you define your sexuality? I've always identified as bisexual. So can you remember what it was like the moment you and your dad were reunited? Was there an instant attraction? It was so weird and confusing. I was seeing my dad for the first time in forever, but it was also like, he's so good looking. And then I was like, what the hell are you thinking? What is wrong with you? I saw him as my dad, but then also part of me was like, I'm meeting this guy who I have been talking to over the internet and really connecting with, and I find him attractive. Was there a single moment you realized that you were sexually and romantically attracted to your dad? After I had stayed with him for about 5 days. What happened? He was living with his girlfriend. On the first night, he slept on the couch and I slept on the floor, just to make sure that I was okay. Why was that? Sleeping in new places makes me very anxious, so I asked him to stay with me in case I had one of the terrible nightmares I usually experience. The second night, I had him sleep on the couch again, and then the third night, I fell asleep with him on the floor lying on his chest, in his arms. The fourth night rolled around and we ended up on the floor again. This time we actually cuddled. When he woke up, we were spooning. I didn't know this at the time, but later, after we admitted our feelings, he told me he had had morning wood and had gone to fix it. Did you feel it? No, I was asleep and he quietly snuck off to the bathroom. Do you mean he went to masturbate? No, he just went to pee. He didn't want me to see that he had an erection. Later that day, we went shopping because I had grown out of all my shorts, so I asked him if he could buy me some new ones. I was trying them on and asked him how I looked and he said I looked good and I felt like I was picking up on something more, but I pushed it out of my head. That night we were play wrestling in the room I was going to sleep in and I bit him. He was wearing a pair of basketball shorts and a tank top and after I bit him I could see goosebumps pop up from his toes to his shoulders. Then he pinched my inner thigh and I got goosebumps. We stopped and said that we didn't know what was going on but admitted that we had strong feelings for each other. We discussed whether it was wrong and then we kissed. And then we made out, and then we made love for the first time. That was when I lost my virginity. Did you tell him you were a virgin? Yes. I told him I wanted him to be the first person I made love to. We talked about how it could be awkward if it didn't end up working out. He also said that if I didn't feel comfortable at any point I should tell him. What was it like? There's a reason I lost my virginity to him, because I never felt comfortable with any other man. It was insanely sensual. It lasted for about an hour and there was a lot of foreplay. We both had orgasms. We are so similar, so it's so easy to sexually please each other. For example, we both love neck biting. I've never been in a more passionate, loving, fulfilling situation. Even the first time, because often it's not the best sexual experience. That's what I said. I'd heard that it would hurt, so I was expecting pain, but we were both so careful with each other. I think it was also a good experience because most guys my age are only interested in having sex with you. I could tell that wasn't the case with him. I'm curious, given the age gap and the perceived power dynamic, did you feel forced or coerced at all? Absolutely not. He made sure I wanted to do it. We both initiated it and he kept asking me if I was okay, not because he thought I was distressed, but because he wanted me to know that we could stop at any point. It was like any other man and woman having sex after they had each admitted their feelings. What was it like afterward? It wasn't weird at all. It felt so natural. It didn't even feel taboo. I felt like I had just made love with a man who I'd been with for years. Did you think that a relationship was a possibility? We discussed it before we had sex. I told him I was saving myself for someone who I'd be committed to for the rest of my life. It was important for me to make it clear that if I made love to him, he was in a relationship with me. I didn't regret it at all. I was happy for once in my life. We fell deeply in love. Have you been depressed before that? I've struggled with chronic depression and I was bullied at school. What were you bullied about? Mostly my weight and the fact that I wasn't pretty enough. But when my dad and I started dating, I became more confident, and it's funny how much more attractive that makes you feel. How quickly did he end things with his girlfriend? We made sure to move out of the girlfriends immediately because we knew we couldn't be together there. Before her, he was with a woman for 8 years and she's now our roommate. Talk about awkward for the first 3 months. Did you tell her about the nature of your relationship? She found out when she heard us making love. I guess we didn't realize how thin the bedroom floor was. She really didn't mind. Now we're like a little family. She calls me her daughter. How many people know about it? Everyone on my mom's side of the family sees us as father and daughter. Those who know that he's my dad, and that we are engaged, include my father's parents. They can see we are happy together and they can't wait for us to have babies. They treat us just like any other couple, the woman we live with, and my best friend. Are you engaged? I'm planning on a full-on wedding, but it won't be legally registered. And personally, I don't believe you need a piece of paper to prove that you want to be with the person you love. When you get married, you are signing part of yourself over to somebody. We'll tell everybody that we got our marriage license, but they don't have to see it. One of our friends will act as the celebrant. Will you have a wedding? Do you have it planned? Yes. I want it to represent our uniqueness, so we aren't doing a white wedding. The color scheme is black and purple, and we are both going to wear Converse tennis shoes. He's wearing jeans and a nice dress shirt. He says he's not wearing a bow tie, but it's my wedding and I am saying that he is. My best friend will be my maid of honor and she'll be dressed in purple. My grandmother and grandfather, my fiancé's parents, are going to attend and my grandpa will give me away. The tables will have bouquets of trees without leaves to represent our marriage, which will be like a growing tree. My dress will be black. How do you manage to hide it from your mom? Is it difficult to keep it a secret? She doesn't live in the same town as us and we visit her, together, a couple of times a month. Occasionally we slip up and call each other babe or other goofy little names. She acts like there's something up, but she doesn't know what the hell it is. We recently got tattoos together. Mine says, "I love my peanut butter," because I call him my peanut butter. He says, "I love my jelly," because that's what he calls me. What father and daughter do you know who have names for each other and tattoos like that? She just said, "Oh, those are cute." She plays dumb about it. Do you think you'll ever tell her? We plan to move to New Jersey where we can be safe under the law, since adult incest isn't illegal there, and once I'm there I'll tell everyone. I'll call my mom and let her know that we are in love and we are having children. If she wants to see her grandkids, we'll send her money and she can drive to see us. Once we are out about it, I won't be comfortable going back to my hometown. What if someone calls the cops? Is that what's stopping you from telling her now? Part of me thinks she won't give a crap, and then another part of me thinks she'll want to hunt us down and get the police to lock us up and throw away the key. She's very unpredictable, so I just don't know how she'll react. What about your sister? I get the sense she knows. We're so close that we always pick up on each other's emotions. When we were younger and I was sad, she would crawl down from her bunk into my bed and comfort me. I've noticed that she relates to my dad as she relates to my ex-boyfriend. She used to call him your dad, but now she hugs him and uses his name. But I do want to tell her because she's very important to me. If it weren't for the legal issues, I would tell everybody. It doesn't feel right to me that we have to hide, but I have to do this to keep my relationship safe. So would you have kids together, or would you adopt? We'll have kids together. Will you tell your kids that their father is your dad, and their grandfather? We've decided that most likely we won't. I don't want to give them any problems. Would you feel comfortable keeping such a big secret? That's something I'll have to figure out. His mom and dad will want to spend time with the grandkids, so we will have to decide how everyone will be known. Do you worry about the potential genetic problems associated with having kids with your biological father? Nope. I wouldn't risk having a kid if I thought it would be harmful. I've done my research. Everybody thinks that kids born in incestuous relationships will definitely have genetic problems, but that's not true. That happens when there are years of inbreeding, like with the royal family. Incest has been around as long as humans have. Everybody just needs to deal with it as long as nobody is getting hurt or getting pressured or forced. There are so many people having kids who will be passing on health problems, people with diabetes, mental health issues, or AIDS. My mom was allowed to have kids, and both she and her mom were bipolar. My research tells me that the only real genetic risk is high blood pressure, which is controllable. I think people only worry about it because they look to the genetic problems that occurred when incest was happening generation upon generation. They say, well, look at King Henry VIII, but he was only a genetic mutant because they had kept it in the family for so long. Is the father-daughter dynamic part of your sex life? Not usually, but it has come up a couple of times when one of us blurts out, "baby girl," or "daddy," or something. The last time it happened, we both stood up and stopped doing what we were doing. It caught us off guard. What is it like to know that your fiancé once dated your mom and has had sex with her? That was so long ago. It's really just the same as thinking about your boyfriend having sex with an ex-girlfriend. I never experienced them as a couple. Do you think you have something special that other couples don't? I think we have a better relationship than any couple I've met because our bond is so strong. I just feel so close to him and so in love with him. We are almost 2 years into the relationship and I'm still head over heels with that first few weeks in love feeling. Everybody says we are the cutest couple they've ever seen. I took him to prom. Didn't he and your mom conceive you on prom night? Yeah. Do you ever call him dad? When I need my dad I say, "Hey, dad, I need you." And then he's not going to be my fiancé or my boyfriend, but my father. Do you ever think about what would happen if you broke up? I honestly don't know what I would do. My life would come to a complete standstill, I wouldn't be happy or confident, and I wouldn't know how to express myself the way I do when I'm with him. If people found out about this, he'd probably get jail time. It's typically the man who gets arrested when there's an incest case. Since you grew up without him and didn't know where he was for such a long time, do you worry that if you broke up you'd lose both your fiancé and your father? We've had that talk, and I do have abandonment issues. For example, he has to walk away when we have arguments, and once he walked outside I told him, please don't go outside, because the last time someone had an argument in my household and walked away they never came back. That was one of my stepfathers. He's promised that if either of us decides the relationship can't work he still wants to be there as my dad. Is the large age gap an issue? I hate immature people, I can't stand drama, and I want to smack most teens because they act like they are 5. I feel like a 37-year-old trapped in an 18-year-old's body. What do you like most about him? I can go to him with anything and he will listen to me and give me good advice. He helps me fix problems. I love everything about him, but the extreme closeness and the special bond are what I really cherish. Most people don't have that. Right from the start we were comfortable being so open and close because we are so similar. I've never felt this close to anyone. What sorts of things do you have in common? We both like being outdoors, and we are interested in artistic things like photography and painting. We both have an extreme love for animals, we have 5 dogs, and we like the countryside and equine activities. He was in FFA when he was in high school, and so was I. Our favorite food is chicken, our second favorite is fish. We both like computers and video games. We both want a big family. Is he physically your type? Definitely. He's alternative and has piercings and tattoos. Do you look alike? I don't think we do, people really just take us as boyfriend and girlfriend. I guess we have similar bone structures. But he's dyed his hair and he looks young for his age, so most people think he's in his 20s. How much time do you spend together? The only thing we do independently is go to work and school. He's a maintenance man and I am studying cosmetology, but other than that we are together 24/7. What's your response to people who just can't get their heads around your relationship? I just don't understand why I'm judged for being happy. We are 2 adults who brought each other out of dark places. People need to research incest and GSA because they don't get it, and I don't think they understand how often it happens. What would you say to people who might think that this is an abusive relationship, that he's your father and you are still a teenager? When you are 18 you know what you want. You're an adult under the law and you're able to consent. I can take care of myself. I don't need protection. If I were in a situation where I needed to get out I would. I'm not afraid to defend myself. My mom taught me self-defense, whether it be stabbing someone in the eye with a mascara brush or kicking a man in the crotch, and she was careful to teach me about inappropriate touching. From a very young age, she told me not to listen to the classic things an abuser might say, like when they tell you to keep it secret or that they will kill you or your family. Why did she focus so much on sexual abuse? Her stepfather sexually abused her and her mother didn't know about it until they'd split up because she was too scared to tell anyone. Were you ever sexually abused when you were younger? No, and my dad has told me that the thought of being involved with me when I was little is appalling to him. Once when I was about 4 I was in a golf cart with my great-great-grandma's husband and he touched me on my inner leg. It wasn't super aggressive, but I felt very uncomfortable about it. I told my father and he called my mom and they took me to a children's hospital to get examined. There were no signs of abuse. Were you suspicious of men when you were growing up? Yes, because I've always known what they are capable of. Do you think that's why you didn't date a lot of men? It was and it wasn't. There weren't a lot of people who caught my eye, for one thing, and I didn't really want to waste my first sexual experience with someone who I couldn't guarantee I'd be with forever. My first kiss was with my boyfriend of 2 years. It's always been important to me that it's serious. I grew up without a father and my mother has had a lot of different partners. I don't want that for my kids. I want them to be in a happy and stable household with two people who love them. Genetic sexual attraction. You're 40, happily married, and then you meet your long-lost brother and fall passionately in love. This isn't fiction. In the age of the sperm donor, it's a growing reality. 50% of reunions between siblings, or parents and offspring, separated at birth result in obsessive emotions. Last month, a former police officer was convicted of incest with his half-sister, but should we criminalize a bond hardwired into our psychology? Alex Kirsta talks to those who have suffered the torment of genetic sexual attraction. At first, Ivor Litton's emotional predicament seems unremarkable, no different from the woes that make up any Agony Aunt's weekly column. On Sunday, October 4, 1998, Litton, an Edinburgh public relations consultant, met the love of his life. The meeting took place at a dinner party at a fashionable country inn. Rita Meadows, who lives in South Africa, was on holiday in Scotland. Describing their meeting, Litton's words overflow with sentiment. From the moment we met, I was smitten and continued to be drawn to her like a magnet. As I got to know her, I felt she had given me a life transmission. She put a smile in my heart and a spring in my step. Each October for the past 4 years, he has sent her a card to commemorate the date of their meeting. What Litton didn't know was that the consequences of that love would plunge him into the most devastating crisis of his life. To say that I have been to hell and back wouldn't be accurate. The situation is far worse than that. On the surface, his ordeal seems a classic case of unrequited love. Despite forming a warm friendship with Litton and meeting him several times a year either abroad or in Britain, Meadows, a divorcee, has never shared his feelings. Irritated and, at times, angry with his outpourings of affection, she recently emailed him curtly to think of her as just a casual friend. Unable to reconcile himself to her indifference, Litton's subsequent depression and sense of rejection, and the continuing compulsion to declare his feelings, are no different from the irrational fixation and emotions that mark any young adult's first major infatuation. But that is as far as the Mills and Boone scenario goes. In the circumstances, Litton's newfound love was doomed to be a non-starter. He is a married man of 66, semi-retired, with grown-up children and grandchildren. The story might be relatively straightforward, and there may even have been a happy ending of sorts had he merely fallen for a woman half his age or abandoned his family to start a new life in another country. Instead, his love for Meadows represents society's most abhorrent taboo. She is his younger sister, adopted as a baby shortly after the death of their mother from an illness contracted after birth, when Litton was 2. Although Meadows had no idea she had a brother, Litton, who was raised by his stepmother after his father's death during the Second World War, had always known of her existence, but waited until 1995 to begin searching for her. The 1998 party at which they met had been organized by Litton, with the help of his wife and children, as a celebratory reunion after he had tracked down his 60-year-old sister in Durban. "I knew Rita was my sister," he says now. "I didn't choose to fall in love with her, or expect to feel sexual desire. It just happened. Even in front of my wife, I made no attempt to hide my adoration, I just buzzed whenever she was around. It was as if no one else existed. The two biggest mistakes I made were deluding myself that I could become all-important in her life, a brother and a surrogate lover, even though she didn't desire me, and then believing I could control and resolve the problem by myself." When we met, Litton brought with him several large files bulging with 4 years' correspondence, mainly email printouts, to and from Rita. A tall, white-haired and articulate man, he has recorded every emotion, thought and incident involving his sister since their reunion. Photographs taken on his trips to South Africa, and on her visits to Scotland, show a vivacious and elegant redhead, seemingly little older than 40. From the sharp intake of breath as he begins reading aloud from his correspondence, it is clear that his feelings are still raw. Letters written shortly after their reunion begin with such endearments as, "My special girl, goddess, darling miracle, my princess." Declaring that she walks on water, Litton confesses how much he misses and thinks of her, miserable at the distance between Edinburgh and Durban. The places they have visited together are described as sacred shrines. But a persistent undercurrent of uncertainty and despair runs through almost every message, as he urges her to write more frequently and to reveal her own feelings. I have found it easy to love you since we met, and am totally committed to our relationship. You illuminate my life, let this be our secret. But how important am I to you? Do you feel affection for me? Breaking off, Litton's voice cracks. Far worse than the pain, he says, are the shame and guilt. You see how besotted I was? Every line oozing with obsession. I mean, what normal brother ever spoke to a sister in this way? How can a man approaching 70 experience emotions usually attributed to a screwed-up adolescent? It's sick. He then produces a diary, one of several in his briefcase, labeled the Journal of an Emotional Junkie, and offers to lend it to me. He started to keep the journal 8 months ago, after discovering that his sister had begun a relationship with a 40-year-old South African banker. He became intensely jealous, an emotion, he stresses, that is virtually alien, and therefore deeply shameful, to him. In one revealing passage he fantasizes about his sister having sex with her new lover. On a visit, she'd shown me some sexy underwear she'd bought in London, including a thing. Once she left England, I visualized her gyrating around a pole, in a G-string, her boyfriend watching lustfully on the bed. Although this is the first time Litton has told any of this to a stranger, he feels that, by doing so, he is beginning to control and resolve the situation. I'm letting you inside my head. Perhaps my experiences can help anyone else in a similar predicament, let them realize they are not alone, that they aren't going mad and haven't turned into some sick, perverted individual, all of which I thought until very recently. In the past year, Litton says, he came close to wrecking his marriage, having a complete nervous collapse, even committing suicide. What saved him was his sister's emotional detachment, his wife's extraordinary patience and understanding, and, most crucially, learning about a little-known phenomenon called genetic sexual attraction, GSA, increasingly acknowledged by post-adoption agencies to be a common feature of reunions between blood relatives who have never before met. I seem to have contracted this condition, GSA, in its severest form, he declares, as if describing a virus. Now that I know there is a condition, and why it occurs, I feel I have reached a turning point and will be able to work towards building a normal, balanced relationship with my sister. If, as seems possible, he comes through the crisis with his marriage, mental stability and relationship with his sister intact, Litton will be in a fortunate minority. The term GSA was first coined in the US in the late 1980s by Barbara Gagnon, the founder of Truth Seekers in Adoption, a Chicago-based support group for adoptees and their newfound relatives. The emergence of GSA both in the US and the UK coincided with the relaxation of adoption laws in the mid-1970s, which gave adopted children easier access to their records and led to an increase in the number of reunions between adoptees and their blood relatives. The unexpectedly high number of reported cases of men and women struggling with sudden and terrifying emotions after a reunion has surprised and perplexed most post-adoption agencies. So far, because of the taboos surrounding GSA and its variable and complex nature, the frequency of these cases is almost impossible to quantify, although these may sound like important and timely advances, but they don't, in fact, add up to much. Because of the revulsion aroused by incest, and the stigma attached to anyone who admits experiencing GSA, let alone those who embark on sexual relations with a parent or sibling, the condition remains obscured by myth, tainted by smutty innuendo, underreported by sufferers and, worse, virtually ignored in academic circles. Although, occasionally, a story involving GSA is given predictably lurid tabloid coverage, ignorance prevails. Why GSA occurs only in some reunions, whether certain people are more predisposed to GSA than others, or whether it manifests itself differently between parents and children or siblings, is simply unknown. Above all, GSA raises serious questions about what factors influenced sexual attraction. Are the origins of GSA social, environmental, or biological? The lack of any serious scientific research is especially disturbing in view of the growing number of reunions between adoptees and their birth parents, and the prospect of many future reunions between children born through IVF involving sperm and egg donors. In the view of Sue Cowling, Deputy Director of the Post-Adoption Center, genetic sexual attraction associated with IVF births is a time bomb waiting to go off. Cowling, like many professionals, suspects that the subject has remained a no-go area, even for psychologists, because even in a society wide awake to the specter of pedophilia and sexual abuse in families, GSA, which falls into neither category, threatens to explode too many cozy assumptions about normal and aberrant sexual instincts. Gonyo, the non-academic who originally outed a GSA in the 1980s, has written the only book on the subject. In it, she suggests that romantic love and erotic arousal may be the delayed byproduct of a missed bonding that would have normally taken place between a mother and her newborn infant, or between siblings had they not been separated by adoption. Many such people, as adults, need to go through that early missed closeness. It may become sexual, or it may not. Gonyo's reputation as the world's leading GSA expert came about largely as a result of her own experience of strong sexual attraction when, in 1979 aged 42, she was reunited with her adult son 26 years after she had given him up for adoption. Now a 65-year-old grandmother, she admits, like Litton, whom she has been counseling by email since he contacted her via the Truth Seekers website, that what saved her marriage and allowed her eventually to build a healthy relationship with her birth son Mitch was that she did not have sex with him, due to his unresponsiveness. An energetic, cheery, and straight-talking woman, Gonyo estimates that it took her a dozen years to overcome the desire to sleep with Mitch. Believe me, the state of arousal, which grew as I got to know him, was as erotic as anything I felt for my husband. I wanted to get naked with Mitch, feel his flesh against mine. The first time I hugged him, it beat any feeling I've experienced in my life. If he had felt the same way, I don't know if I could have stopped myself. But Mitch was very afraid of my feelings, and wouldn't ever talk about any of this, or how he felt. At that time, Mitch, an art teacher, had various girlfriends. Despite this, my behavior around him was atrocious. I was flirtatious, coquettish, and playful. When getting ready to see him, I primped and primed, becoming like a 16-year-old in mind and body. I was trying to win him over, like someone I wanted to date or marry. Gonyo recalls feeling ashamed and dirty. At the beginning, the urge was less erotic, more like bonding with a newborn child. As with all my subsequent children, I wanted to smell him, stroke and run my fingers through his hair. I saw so much of myself in him, and he also reminded me strongly of his father, my first teenage love. But having experienced that primary stage of his delayed bonding, Gonyo wanted more. I was no longer looking for the baby, I wanted a relationship with the adult, the man. What frightened her was that these emotions did not fit into any appropriate context. I wasn't Mitch's lover or girlfriend, and I couldn't be his mother, because he had one, although he never allowed me to meet her. I felt like an intruder, unimportant and humiliated. When Mitch got married 12 years ago, Gonyo finally established a relaxed friendship with him. It's as if I've turned him over to his wife, so now we can be friends. It took me until then to be able to say honestly that I don't have those sexual feelings anymore. What meeting Mitch taught me was self-control. It also led to her passionate mission to encourage widespread understanding of GSA. 25 years ago, that would have seemed an absurdly unrealistic goal given that this realm of human desire was guaranteed to repel most people, including Gonyo's clients. Since then, not much has changed. GSA becomes an incest issue, whether or not it is carried out in a sexual act, she says, pinpointing the most likely explanation for the paucity of research. Most people will only reveal their own situation once someone else breaks the ice. Gonian recalls that, when she told a support group for adoptees and birth mothers about her own feelings on meeting Mitch, her disclosure was met with repugnance. Some openly dismissed such feelings as sick. But, a few days later, she was phoned by the wife of one of the group's male participants, telling her that she was convinced her husband was similarly infatuated with his birth mother, whom he had recently met, and asking Gonyo if she could help him. It wasn't until almost a decade later, when Gagnon became the director of Truth Seekers in Adoption and raised the issue of GSA, that others began plucking up the courage to confess their own forbidden attraction to a parent, adult child, or sibling with whom they had been reunited. She vividly remembers the first time someone raised their hand in one workshop. A man in his 30s, he was the first person she saw stand up in a room full of people and speak the unspeakable. He simply said, "I slept with my mother. I was 21 when I found her. We were very much in love. After several years, it stopped." His mother had ended the relationship because it was too painful for her. She felt guilty and was afraid of being discovered. That was more than 10 years ago, and he said he'd not only lost his lover, but what was even more important, his mother. He said he had never regretted having sex with his mother, only that losing her was a high price to pay. Many clients consult Gagnon privately, even anonymously, by phone or email. Often, the attraction isn't sexual, but it's still frightening and alien, and therefore perceived as abnormal and sinful. One woman told me that she and her birth mother, soon after they met, slept together in the nude. There was no sex, only a strong need to be close as parent and child. Grown men tell me they've sat in their mother's lap, just being rocked and held. One man talked about his need to be sexual with his newly found brother, but not being homosexual, they shared a woman instead. Sometimes, she warns, there may be an underlying element of revenge. One man admitted openly, "My real mother fucked me over. Now I'm going to fuck her." In contrast, many others experience an almost primordial sense of having belonged to the other person all their life. For Gagnon, the recognition that she shared her son's sarcastic humor and artistic talents, and saw the male side of herself in him, were especially powerful. This sudden shock of familiarity is often also commented on by twins separated at birth. Gagnon is not surprised that attraction between fathers and daughters should be the least reported variant of GSA. That group tends to stay very silent. It's still regarded as dangerously close to abuse, even though it is no different from other forms of GSA. But it does happen. A woman who recently traced her non-identical twin daughters, and included the birth father at the reunion, was horrified when one of the daughters and the father became instantly attracted to one another. As is common in cases of parent-child GSA, the attraction involved the girl who most resembled her father. It's like my meeting Mitch. For a woman, meeting your father is to meet the male aspects of yourself for the first time. Sometimes, that recognition may act as a powerful aphrodisiac. A young woman in one of Gagnon's workshops confessed that she had been in love with her father, and he with her, since their reunion. Only after they both suffered mental breakdowns did they have sex. Sadly, although they imagined it would be cathartic, after sleeping together they felt no happier. Almost invariably, the outcome of sexual relations between reunited relatives is that any subsequent lasting relationship, platonic or otherwise, is doomed, a dilemma illustrated in Katherine Harrison's 1997 memoir The Kiss, a frank, sometimes shocking, account of her affair with her father. That awareness has led New York psychotherapist Joe Saul to adopt the term genetic attraction, believing the word sexual is in many cases inaccurate and also responsible for the underlying shame and fear that make the condition so distressing. He has noticed that the romance that develops, especially when mothers meet their adult children, mirrors the sensuous bonding between a new mother and her baby. These people regress to a very early stage of development. The relationship is sensual, but we don't call it romance, or being in love, when it's breastfeeding, cradling and stroking, or when it's a mother and baby gazing into one another's eyes. Often, people tell me all they want to do is snuggle up together. A woman reunited with her adult son felt an overwhelming urge to suckle. There's an urge for intimacy, which they were previously denied. Where that urge leads to sex, which appears to be more common between brothers and sisters, Saul and Gagnon encounter the greatest desperation and refusal to exert self-control. I'll get calls from clients asking me in which of the American states they would be allowed to set up home together, or even get married, says Gagnon. It doesn't matter what age they are, when your hormones are raging, you don't think about the consequences. GSA rarely features at conferences on adoption, however, because the big U.S. institutions, such as the National Council for Adoption, are reluctant to recognize the phenomenon. On the rare occasions that workshops do take place, they are usually packed. Unlike the UK, most US states are opposed to open adoption, so adoptees' records are sealed, which presents a formidable obstacle to family research. Gagnon, meanwhile, is convinced that the more an adopted child is told about their original family, and sees photographs of parents and siblings indicating shared characteristics, the less likely this will come as an intense shock if they meet. Although it is better to play in the sandbox as kids than in bed as adults, she says, the authorities prefer to ignore GSA, so it remains confused with real incest, rape and child abuse. But in the light of the confessions and desperate actions of some victims of GSA, isn't it understandable that such confusion exists? Understandable, perhaps, but not inevitable. In contrast to America's squeamishness in addressing the issue, by the early 1990s British post-adoption agencies such as NORCAP, the Child Migrants Trust and the Post-Adoption Center were already admitting that, far from being either unique or bizarre, or a sign of deviance or emotional disorder, GSA was an all-too-normal reaction to an extreme emotional situation, and more commonplace than supposed. Not that this makes it any easier to understand. Today, the Post-Adoption Center, which offers practical information and counseling at any stage before, during and after adoptee reunions, and sees 3,000 new clients a year, estimates that up to half of reunions are accompanied by anything from temporary attraction to obsessive sexual obsession, and, very occasionally, even to the birth of a child. At their most extreme, such relationships can have dangerous and potentially tragic consequences for families, especially spouses. In a recent, well-publicized case, a mother of two, Jennifer Grant, and her adopted half-brother, John Shannon, a former mayor of Pickering, North Yorkshire, left their respective spouses and children and set up home together after being united for the first time in 46 years. Interviewed by a Sunday newspaper in 2001, Jennifer's husband Graham, whose physical resemblance to John is striking, talked about his ordeal, typical of casualties floundering in the riptide of such obsessions. I asked her if she had gone to bed with him and she said they had. I just left the house, got in my van and drove. I wanted to do myself in. Then I thought of the boys and what it would do to them. When I got back, she had gone. Graham Grant reportedly cannot come to terms with what has happened. It fills me with shock and dread, he said. Members of our family have found it hard to discuss the matter with me. There's a sense of shame and disgust. It's left me feeling like a leper. Although, reportedly, there was a police inquiry into his wife's relationship with Shannon, with which they cooperated fully, the investigation ended due to lack of evidence that any crime had been committed. Under the Sexual Offences Act of 1956, sexual intercourse between a brother or even a half-brother and sister is an offence that carries a maximum prison sentence of 7 years. Although he escaped imprisonment, Scarborough police officer Tony Smedley's 9-month affair with his half-sister Janet Poveling tore apart his life. When Smedley's colleagues accidentally came across love letters that clearly referred to their sexual relationship, he and Poveling were arrested and committed for trial on charges of incest. He pleaded guilty when the case came to York Crown Court last month, and received a conditional discharge. The charges against Poveling were not pursued. Even so, Smedley lost his job, and must now try to rebuild a future with his wife and children, and with his sister's family. Another British brother and sister, Kim Straker and Terry O'Neill, who lived together as a couple and eventually had a child, were taken to court in the early 1990s. They were given suspended sentences and allowed to keep their daughter. They have since parted. Even where such relationships do not end in turmoil and trauma, the effects of the taboo itself remain inescapably powerful. One of the strangest cases in recent years is that of Gary Clare and Mika Zaman, who met in 1979 in their Connecticut hometown and enjoyed a casual 6-month affair. In 1998, by which time both were in their 50s and married, Mika, knowing she was adopted, had traced her biological parents and found that she was one of 13 children born to the same couple, 9 of whom were given up for adoption to couples in the area. One of them was Gary Clare. On realizing that she had had sex with her brother, Mika was physically sick. Although it was brief and we were not that involved or serious, it was a shocking revelation and I was filled with tremendous guilt and sadness. I have since forgiven myself and realize it was foolish to feel guilty. After all, we did not know we were brother and sister, and when we re-met in 1998 the chemistry had long disappeared. Although the news also shocked Gary, he maintains that someone less emotionally well-adjusted might have suffered greater damage. A person with a different personality might have jumped out of the window, or at least had profound long-term feelings of guilt. But if you understand that 9 out of 13 children from the biological family were adopted out to different families, with different names and different religions, within a 15-mile radius of the hospital where we were born, then something like this was bound to happen. I never had an idea, until 1998, that I was adopted. How could we have known that we were brother and sister? Cowling says that neither the threat of prosecution nor the suffering of families are a deterrent to those caught up in and determined to pursue such relationships. I've heard women, including mothers sleeping with their sons, tell me, "It's the most amazing sex I've ever had. Don't ask me to give it up, I can't." When the relationship becomes obsessive and violent, especially between mothers and sons, the danger seems only to heighten the sexual chemistry and magnetic bond. I've worked with cases where the violence has been terrifying because one person becomes fixated, phoning their relative 10, 12 times a day, demanding to know their movements, stalking them like a jealous lover, says Cowling. But the other person still can't pull away. It's like an addiction. She cites a man who was imprisoned for violence against his mother. The woman went into hiding, but he found her. We were getting panic-stricken calls from her at all hours, saying, "He's coming for me, what shall I do?" Yet she, too, was obsessed with him. In another instance, a woman referred to her son as a "my lover," and talked of her body aching for him. Unfortunately, for some men, the sex and violence is a way of punishing the birth mother for abandoning them, and for mothers the sex is a guilt trip. They feel they owe it to their son after giving him up for adoption. The dilemma originally faced by professionals such as Cowling was that everyone wanted to help, but no one knew how. In 1992, Dr. Maurice Greenberg, a consultant psychiatrist, head of student counseling services at University College London and former advisor to the Post-Adoption Centre, conducted what, incredibly, remains the only academic study into GSA. He interviewed 8 male and female adoptees and analyzed another 40 cases, including birth parents, reported by the Post-Adoption Centre. The objective was largely to gather information to help guide counselors. Greenberg, who has the gentle, amiably absent-minded manner that instantly makes you want to tell him your troubles, admits he knew he was entering an unusual and special area and asked the Post-Adoption Centre why it did not simply acknowledge that these people were having incestuous relationships, rather than use the euphemism genetic sexual attraction. But was it really such a euphemism? What Greenberg couldn't foresee was how promptly he would do a U-turn, concluding that the consummation of GSA was incest only in the strictest biological sense. Today, he insists that it is essential to distinguish GSA from incest, and especially from child abuse. There is no force, coercion, usually no betrayal of trust, and no victim. If sex occurs, it involves consenting adults. He stresses that none of the interviewees who were sexually aroused by or had sex with a parent or sibling considered this incestuous, or that their behavior was wrong, but when I asked them if they might ever have similar feelings about members of their adoptive family, they shuddered at the suggestion. Most interviewees described the period before a reunion as already exceptionally emotionally charged, filled with excitement and fantasies about meeting their relative. Reunions were characterized by so-called mirroring, the shock of familiarity and self-recognition on first meeting. Even where there is little physical resemblance, the emergence of shared interests, similar traits, mannerisms and instincts, often subtly transmitted through sense rather than verbal communication, tended to have a profound impact on one or both relatives. Greenberg says that many use the terms, finding a soulmate, and, like looking in the mirror for the first time. Body odor, too, held an especially powerful attraction. There was, says Greenberg, frequent fascination with a relative's characteristic smell, acknowledged to be a potent factor in both human and animal attraction, as well as the feel of their skin and the sound of their voice. The sudden, overwhelming sense of falling in love, a profound need for unusual closeness and intimacy, was almost universal. As adults, we have very limited abilities for communicating such intense feelings, and sometimes sex becomes the only familiar means. The intriguing paradox that Greenberg appears to have uncovered is that, no matter how shocking it appears, GSA is a largely normal response to an extremely unusual situation, blood relatives meeting as strangers. More crucially, the existence of GSA, as distinct from habitual incest and child abuse within families, raises fundamental issues concerning sexual attraction, as well as with the origins of the incest taboo, areas that have only recently been the subject of serious research. No analysis of incest and sexual desire is possible without the shadow of Freud looming over the debate. A new study by psychologists at the University of St. Andrews shows that men and women are more likely to choose a spouse whose eye, skin and hair color resembles that of their opposite-sex parent. Last year, a study by the same team revealed that women with older fathers, and men with older mothers, are usually attracted to older-looking partners. The same principle applies to racial characteristics, and to the smell of an opposite-sex parent. Although the reasons are unclear, one theory is that we are imprinted from birth with certain familiar characteristics with which we feel comfortable and to which we are eventually attracted. However, Freud would have had an altogether different take on it, believing that the Oedipus complex was paramount in determining all sexual behavior. Freud's theory, propounded in 1897, that every male infant has an overwhelming sexual desire for his mother, and every female for her father, is the cornerstone of psychoanalytic theory. He maintained that these incestuous drives were so powerful that they had to be suppressed. Our transition, between the ages of 2 and 5, from the incestuous Oedipal phase to the post-Oedipal phase, resolves these impulses and, according to Freudian theory, is crucial to healthy human development. By the time we reach the post-Oedipal stage, the incest taboo, Freud reasoned, is indelibly imprinted on the psyche, governing future sexual behavior. But how persuasive is this Oedipal theory nowadays? Because Freudian ideas dominated much of the 20th century, what is less well known is that, at the turn of the 19th century, a contemporary of Freud's, the Finnish social anthropologist Edward Westermarck, put forward the opposite view, based not on the theory of natural attraction but of natural aversion. According to Westermarck, children growing up in close proximity are not sexually attracted to each other as adults. Quite the contrary, the Westermarck effect meant that overfamiliarity and boredom automatically caused siblings and other close relatives raised together to go out of their way to avoid sexual contact. Westermarck also reasoned that, since we find the idea of sex with our relatives so distasteful, we developed moral codes and laws to ensure that society conformed to this norm, to avoid any social disruption, shame or discrimination. Although these ideas were rubbished by Freud for their lack of supportive evidence, despite his own inability to provide a scientific rationale for the Oedipus complex, in recent years evidence confirming the Westermarck effect among humans and other species continues to grow. By revealing more about what lies behind our choice of sexual partners, these findings may hold clues to the mystery of GSA. In one ongoing study of children raised on Kiryat Yehudim, an Israeli kibbutz, between the 1950s and late 1960s, U.S. and Israeli anthropologists were amazed to discover that the sabras, boys and girls of almost identical ages from different families, did not, as their parents hoped and anticipated, marry each other. As one of the first researchers, Melford Spiro, observed in 1958, the intimacy between these children, especially between the ages of 7 and 12, could not have been greater. Not only did they shower, sleep and run around naked together and explore each other's bodies, as they approached puberty they began openly to play sex games, including intimate kissing, fondling and simulated, or attempted, sexual intercourse. Despite this climate of sexual freedom, by their mid-teens the girls, especially, displayed signs of shame and became hostile towards the boys, to the point of insisting on having unisex showers. At around 15, the girls became attracted to older students and young unmarried men in the kibbutz, admitting that they saw their peers as brothers. In a second phase of the study, when these children had grown up, it emerged that not only had no marriages taken place between any of the Sabras from Kiryat Yeterim and 3 other kibbutzim, but neither was there a single reported incident of sexual intercourse. Eventually, another team of sociologists analyzed the records of almost all known kibbutz marriages, totaling nearly 3,000. In only 16 cases did members of the same peer group marry, and in these cases the couple had met only after the age of 6. In the 1960s, about the same time as the kibbutz studies were being concluded, Professor Arthur Wolf, an American anthropologist from Stanford University in California, traveled to Taiwan to study the effects of child training methods on child behavior. He ended up living for long periods in Chinese communities after discovering, by chance, that these had a high incidence of a certain type of arranged marriage, known as the simpua, or minor form, in which the bride was sent away as a young child by her parents to be brought up alongside her future husband as an adopted daughter-in-law of the family. Wolf, now 70, has spent the past 4 decades examining the effects of this now almost extinct practice, and revealing its previously unforeseen consequences. Although the age at which the girl went to the future husband's family was between 3 and 5, in some areas of Taiwan they were under 2. Many who entered these marriages were, in fact, nursed by their future mothers-in-law. When Wolf asked some of these surviving mothers-in-law why they did this, he was taken aback by their candor. They explained that the children weren't treated as daughters, they were referred to as a little daughter-in-law. They'd say, "It's better to raise your son's wife, because she will listen to what you tell her and won't always be talking about your son behind your back." It was the classic mother-in-law strategy. A shortage of suitable brides in these developing communities in the late 19th and early 20th century made this trade in girl children an attractive proposition. Wolf discovered that the mothers of infant boys whose next child was a girl preferred to give her away and then adopt someone else's infant daughter as a future daughter-in-law. As in the kibbutzim, the future couple, very close in age, were effectively raised as siblings. Unlike the children from the kibbutz, however, they had to marry, and, as grown-ups, many refused to go through with the marriage, or did so only under threat of severe punishment. Some women, says Wolf, became prostitutes rather than marry their fiancé, and in marriage adultery was rife. One man promised he would marry any other woman as long as it wasn't his fiancée, although she was very attractive. This was more than lack of sexual interest, it was a complete sexual indifference towards their intended partner, which, as Westermark claimed, led to disgust and aversion when the act was merely thought of or became a possibility. Wolf's studies of government records of marriages, divorces and births of everyone in Taiwan prove that, compared with other arranged marriages in which couples were introduced as adolescents, such minor marriages were a disaster. His analysis of 25,000 minor marriages found that many ended in divorce and few offspring. Most significant of all is Wolf's discovery that these marriages were spectacularly unsuccessful if the girl had been adopted into her husband's family when aged 5 or younger. If she came at 3 or younger, the sexual aversion and rate of marriage breakdown was very high. After 5 or 6, there wasn't much difference between married couples who met at 16. There is some factor in developmental psychology during the first 3 years of life that seems critical in determining sexual attraction, but we don't know yet what this factor is. It may be a long time, if ever, before we can identify the complex interplay of nature and nurture behind the dramas of love and loathing played out in the kibbutz and in Taiwan. Or know precisely at what stage in the sweaty rough and tumble of shared childhood that the potential for mutual sexual desire is switched off. But one thing seems clear, GSA is neither a horror, an illness, nor a perversion. Indeed, given what we already know, might it eventually prove to be not that much of a mystery? Some names have been changed. I hope you appreciated this article. Before you move on, I was hoping you would consider taking the step of supporting The Guardian's journalism. From Elon Musk to Rupert Murdoch, a small number of billionaire owners have a powerful hold on so much of the information that reaches the public about what's happening in the world. The Guardian is different. We have no billionaire owner or shareholders to consider. Our journalism is produced to serve the public interest, not profit motives. And we avoid the trap that befalls much U.S. media, the tendency, born of a desire to please all sides, to engage in false equivalence in the name of neutrality. While fairness guides everything we do, we know there is a right and a wrong position in the fight against racism and for reproductive justice. When we report on issues like the climate crisis, we're not afraid to name who is responsible. And as a global news organization, we're able to provide a fresh, outsider perspective on U.S. politics, one so often missing from the insular American media bubble. Around the world, readers can access The Guardian's paywall-free journalism because of our unique reader-supported model. That's because of people like you. Our readers keep us independent, beholden to no outside influence, and accessible to everyone, whether they can afford to pay for news or not.